In this edition of FSW Conversations, I'm talking to Sanja Bećirović, an expert on global luxury, which has been a beguiling topic for many to understand, particularly given the steep price increases that we have seen in the industry over the past few years. Sanja has worked in fashion, merchandising, and business development for 12 years across brands such as YSL, Mango, ASOS, Jigsaw, and Urban Revival, where she focused on growing brands in fast-paced markets across North America, Europe, and Asia. Today, she is with Centric Software, where she supports brands to make smarter, more data-driven decisions. Centric delivers solutions to plan, design, develop, source, buy, make, price, allocate, sell, and replenish products. Sonia, I came across your work on global and pricing on LinkedIn, found some of the most insightful work on that topic that I've seen. So I'm super excited to have you on FSW Conversations today. So maybe we could just kick off about how you got into global pricing.
Thank you for having me, Bryce. Like you mentioned, I've been in the fashion industry predominantly in buying and merchandising roles for most of my career. And a couple of years back, I switched over to the tech side, and I've been with Centric for about 2 years now, offering solutions specifically in market intelligence, planning, and pricing, and helping really my former colleagues to figure out this arena. I started to find really interesting insights using our market intelligence tool around pricing, both across luxury, high street, and specifically how prices differ globally for different brands. And I started posting that on socials, and apparently it's become quite an interesting topic.
Great, fantastic. Well, when we look at pricing dynamics over the last several years, certainly since kind of the post-pandemic super cycle began, the price increases have been large. I see different estimates. Bain had a number, I think 50% price increases. And then you see cross-country differences as well. So I think many people are puzzled on how we get to some of these types of numbers, how we get these differences across countries. So I wonder if you could talk us through what are some of the main factors that influence how luxury brands set prices and set prices across different regions.
So I think we can split them into two camps. There are some obvious ones and perhaps some not so obvious factors. So the clear ones are the numerical ones that you can calculate based on taxes, import duties, customs. For example, in Brazil, it's very known to have higher import duties specifically on luxury. So you could find in the Brazilian market that a luxury handbag is probably double the price as the same bag in Europe or US. Then we obviously have VAT, or sales taxes. You have the US, where taxes vary by state. We also have currency exchange rates. So that's not to say that you should look at every single fluctuation of a currency, but more identifying if a currency is stable or volatile. An example is the Argentinian pesos, really volatile currency. So brands tend to mark up to protect themselves. And then tariffs, trade agreements, the European Union is a very clear example of that. Those are three that are very easy to quantify, and there are many more as well that exist. And then you have more abstract factors like market positioning and market perception of that brand or of the market as a whole, of the luxury. So Italy, it's the home of luxury. Therefore, there tends to be a more accessible pricing because luxury is part of the culture. It's more ingrained in the day-to-day life of the clients. And the market is more saturated with luxury options. And then you have China. Now, generalizing, we have aspirational luxury. Luxury goods are highly sought after as a symbol of status, a symbol of wealth. So therefore, it's easier for brands to price items higher in China to reflect that premium status. However, going into 2025, we have seen over the past 2-3 years extreme increases. So I think what we'll see is the opposite. And then we have purchasing power. This is a really key one. So the UAE, especially places like Dubai, have higher disposable income. So luxury brands can price up at a premium, knowing that there is an appetite for this. And then you have lower purchasing power in bigger markets that are growing, like India, a market that is growing massively for luxury goods, and brands often adjust prices downwards, or maybe not even adjust prices, but they offer more entry-level products of their ranges in order to capture that growing middle-class market.
I'd love to pick up on India, a big growing market. Given the per capita GDP in India versus some wealthier countries, you would have your pricing reflect those household wealth dynamics. But in any market economy, prices are a signal and it's a symbol of what a good represents. And in luxury, a lot of that is about exclusivity. So luxury brand goes into a market like India. How do they square that circle where you want to adapt to local market conditions, but at the same time, your price still needs to kind of reflect that exclusivity signal that you want to send?
So exclusivity is massively tied to price, but tying it solely to price, I think, is a bit of a cop out. So there are other importances that carry weight when it comes to exclusivity. We can look at the process of buying an Hermes bag. So Hermes have shifted their focus from pure pricing to the buying experience, particularly with the Birkin bag. They control the supply, they release a limited number of bags, then they enforce a wait list. They enforce clients to create an established relationship with the sales associate to build up a purchase history. So, this controlled process makes it more about the journey and the relationship than the actual purchase itself. And then this approach helps them position themselves as a status symbol that cannot be attained only by wealth. So there are people that have tried to go into a store saying, look at all the money that I have, that have been denied simply because they don't have that purchase history. Number two is selective distribution. So a brand that does this really well is Goyard. They have limited their number of retail locations. They're also avoiding online sales. So last time I checked, you couldn't buy a Goyard bag on their website. You have to be in the physical store. So they make themselves really difficult to find, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but it adds mystery and it adds prestige. So by carefully selecting where they are, then you regain that exclusivity factor. Then you have regional exclusives that you can go ahead with. That could be something for the Indian market. We see that with Louis Vuitton in Japanese collaborations with Yayoi Kusama. That's executed very well because it is a limited edition item. It resonates with the Japanese cultural aesthetic, but it also resonates with art and luxury fanatics. And art in itself is very tied to exclusivity. Back to the topic of price, controlling the discounting and controlling the outlet model that you have. So we know famously that certain brands avoid discounting like the plague.
I certainly agree with you. Luxury is basically a vector of different attributes, exclusivity being one, the quality of the experience, whether that's digital, whether that's in store, is another. The issue of pricing, particularly, say, in a large emerging market, maybe this speaks more to so-called aspirational type consumers, because in every market, however big or small, you always have a certain number of buyers that are fairly price inelastic. That is, it doesn't matter whether the economy's up or down, or whether prices drift, there'll still be a certain amount of demand there. But for middle class, maybe upper middle class consumers who are, sensitive to the economic cycle, price movements, I think that maybe there's more of a story here. And so if I'm a brand and I want to make sure that I can attract these types of clients, but I still want to keep myself in luxury pricing rather than drift into premium pricing, how do brands make those types of decisions?
So the rise of e-commerce has definitely brought pricing transparency to a whole new level. Brands need to be really careful nowadays because customers are extremely savvy when it comes to using different VPNs and checking different country sites. So I see brands doing certain things consistently, and that is number one, making sure that those iconic pieces that represent the brand are consistently priced across markets. So you shouldn't see extreme differences across a Birkin or Submariner Rolex, for example. Those should be relatively consistent. But then instead, what they do is have selective online offerings to stop clients from being able to actively compare a chunk of their assortment preserved for the in-store purchase. So you would have to visit the actual location to see that product. I've mentioned Hermes already, but in some stores, you don't even have that product on display. You have to actively ask for it. You have to go into a specific room. So that's also part of the luxury process. Then having exclusive online collections. So we see certain brands that do this very well. Gucci, Dior, they've had multiple online exclusives that are not available in stores, that are not available in third-party resellers or multi-brand retailers. So there's no way to compare that. So you can purchase it online or not, but that is how you find out the price. So think those are very nice ways to go about that challenge.
I think that segues into the role of technology generally in pricing management decisions. How would new software tools, particularly data analytics, play a role in determining prices?
Definitely. It's funny because when I first started off in the industry, we had no tools and we would do this kind of comp shopping in physical locations. So you go to the store and you would write it down on your notebook, or you would count up the number of SKUs and the prices. And where we are today is such a long way from that. But I think one of the core challenges faced by the luxury industry is maximizing margin, especially now that we see increased competition. We see this evolving customer behavior that we just spoke about. So, software solutions play a critical role in addressing these challenges. Perhaps I would divide it into four steps. So the first one is data collection. Optimizing pricing, number one is understanding holistically your cost structure. Because if you don't know your margins, then there's no way to optimize your price. So PLM solutions, product lifecycle management solutions, help luxury brands to centralize all product data from production cost to material usage to vendor details, etc. Number two is competitor benchmarking. What products are your competitors selling? What products are they discounting? So you would most likely want, rather than going out to the store, some kind of AI powered tool to look into that. With that comes market insights and customer preferences. So you need to be able to align your pricing strategy with the demand that you're seeing in the market. Especially in luxury, now we're seeing this increased shift towards sustainability, exclusivity, personalized experiences. How can you stand out? So advanced analytics tools like Centric Market Intelligence can track these purchasing patterns, customer behaviors, market trends. And then your final step would be your inventory and demand planning. So when you do understand the market, you need to be able to effectively manage your inventory in order to remain exclusive and avoid that overproduction. Planning tools help optimize inventory by forecasting the demand more accurately. So normally they use real-time sales data combined with market trends and customer insights. So this will reduce your excess stock and boost your margin.
Do you feel that there's a lot of penetration of these types of tools in the industry, or do you feel like luxury lags other elements of the retail market?
I think luxury has always been a little bit more, I don't know if the right word is behind, but when we try to divide brand retail users, the ones that we see are ahead when it comes to optimization tools are your newcomers, your pure players, the ones that have kind of only online presence because it's easier to adapt to, right? Luxury comes from a bricks and mortar history. So you need to be able to execute changes as well. That is tricky when you have a number of stores. Sometimes in luxury, you have store managers that have higher input than your buyer and merchandiser in the head office, which is really unique to luxury. And therefore, I think they're getting there, but there's still a way to go with optimization tools. However, when it comes to product lifecycle management, they are definitely in line with everyone else because you need a place to store your data from
Right.
idea inception all the way to final product. So there we're seeing it evened out a little bit more. It's more that the in-season bit because the client relationship looks so different. And it's more of a slower moving market, right, than your fast fashion and your high street and your premium.
That's a fantastic insight. The difference in the role of the store manager
Yeah.
in luxury, the locus of decision making may be a little bit different at these higher price points. And another trend we're seeing of organizations is the popularity of dynamic pricing. How you see this trend catching on in luxury fashion. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what dynamic pricing is and why that would matter if it becomes more important in the luxury space.
It's funny because I recently posted a poll asking people on LinkedIn if they knew what dynamic pricing was, and the majority actually didn't. And I'm not surprised at all because it's such a buzzword that's come up recently. Dynamic pricing, in order to explain it, we have to understand different maturity stages of pricing within a brand. Oftentimes, you see price start with cost based pricing. So, obviously, you have your cost, you have your margin, you have your retail price. And then after an organization has operated for a while, they identify that, oh, we can charge a little bit more now, or we're noticing that the customer is prepared to pay more for this type of product. And that's also where we see luxury brands in what we call value-based pricing, because we're charging at the perceived value of the product, not necessarily at an X markup. Um, and then slowly, as a brand evolves, you start understanding that we're not the only ones in this market. We need to keep a track of the competition. And we often talk about it in our industry that unless you hold 100% market share, you need to know what the other players are up to grow as a business. So that's when brands and retailers start looking at competitive pricing and using tools to find data around their competition. And as they expand globally, even look at global pricing, so what's happening in different regions outside of the obvious currency exchanges, but also how disposable income affects prices and what their competitors are up to. And then we've started talking about price optimization. And that's when you take all of this data and you overlay it on top of your internal data. So the external data that you see from the competition, overlay it on your stock and sales, and you start understanding what's going on in the market. How should I react to clear my stock on time, to have the right initial price, to have the right discounted price? Then you can also overlay that with e-commerce data. So what's the traffic that I'm seeing to my website, or even store data? What's the footfall that I'm seeing in my physical stores? And that's price optimization. We're still not at dynamic pricing, because dynamic pricing requires a level of reactivity. Dynamic pricing is what we see in the airplane industry. So on Tuesdays, apparently airplane prices are the best time to buy them. So I've heard. Or concert tickets. Those are typical examples of dynamic pricing, where prices change with the demand. So if you're using optimized pricing and you're then able to react in an instant, normally this is pure players that are able to do that. Based on at 3 o'clock, we see the most visits to this product page, specifically to this red dress, and we change our prices at 3 o'clock based on that demand. That is dynamic pricing. And are we there yet as an industry? I think there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of appetite for this way of operating, but there's also some nervousness around how will the customer perceive this. So again, how we spoke about luxury being not the pioneers in this space, I think they're waiting it out a little bit to see how this can be adapted to luxury. And the way that I see it applicable to luxury is building on the personalized experience. So you can start building on the client purchase history. And depending on that, combined with their loyalty to the brand or the frequency of their purchases, you can then offer them a certain price, or you can offer them certain exclusivity or the option to see something before the rest of the market. I think that's a better way to adapt it to luxury.
I imagine we must see that in the fast fashion type of world, in places where margins are quite a bit lower, but revenue comes mostly through high volume sales. Am I right about that?
Yeah, definitely predominantly through high street, maybe up to premium, but to utilize dynamic pricing strategies, you have to be able to execute dynamic pricing. So, is your organization set up to do that? And that's where mostly those high street pure players that have started off digital from the word go, and therefore it's easier for them to optimize and say at the click of a button, we're switching all the prices. Whereas if you have a bunch of physical stores, how's that going to work?
Do you see even nascent interest from luxury, at least in exploring the capacity?
The most interest that we're seeing from luxuries exploring those different pricing steps, going into step 3 and 4 of competitive pricing and global pricing. So historically, they've been at value-based. This is what we know our customers are willing to pay, and therefore this is our price. Now we're seeing luxury brands are more and more interested in what is the market demand, what are the competitors doing, and they're not operating in silos. They're more bouncing off of each other. So I think it's going in that direction. Maybe in the next 5 years, we'll start seeing more dynamic pricing.
Interesting. And when I also think of some unique qualities of luxury, maybe that's separated out from elements of the market, it's one of arguing that they produce maybe a more sustainable product. Obviously, there's a lot of news running contrary to that, but certainly it's at the very least an aspiration that this is a strong reason to command the pricing power that they have, that they source sustainably, and that's not me saying that that's the case, but certainly that's the hope, and there are a bunch of European regulations waiting to come on board to make that happen. But do you see luxury brands starting to use sustainability as a kind of a reason to command premium prices? And do you see any evidence that consumers really are willing to pay more when they perceive that the product is sustainable?
So the apparel industry is still one of the most polluting industries on earth. And more than 70% of those emissions come from the production process. So you mentioned the laws that are coming into place, especially across Europe and UK. So there will be evidently no more ways to avoid it. So the ways that we see luxury brands doing it today, and I was writing about Stella McCartney that does it extremely well, is sustainable materials. So number one is innovative, eco-friendly materials. Stella McCartney has been a pioneer in sustainable fashion, even when it wasn't popular, using recycled polyester, organic cotton, vegan leather. We're seeing that being more and more popular, but also being carbon neutral. So Kering became fully carbon neutral across their operations from sourcing to stores, and they're actively promoting sustainability initiatives, sustainable packaging, and reducing waste, because that's a huge part of the luxury process as well, where you have the experience, but also how the goods are packaged and all those different layers and papers and boxes. Brands like Hermes are adopting sustainable packaging solutions, so they're using recycled or biodegradable materials. And then number 3, transparency across the supply chain. So there's a demand for full supply chain transparency, and that is increasingly happening. So, for example, Prada has committed to using only sustainable nylon by 2025. So, TBC, if we're going to see that happen. But there's definitely more conversations. It's stated more in reports. But going back to your question around consumers, we're seeing with our tools trends in the market. So what is not just what are the competitors and the brands and the retailers putting out in the market, but also what is the customer looking for? What are their search terminologies? How are they growing on the year? And we do see ebbs and flows. So it's interesting, but we saw sustainability. 2023 was huge. 2024, we saw a bit of a shift where it needs some more energy put into it. I think there's been other priorities for consumers, probably with the economic climate. And then there's also this huge, huge dupe culture that we're seeing as well. And that's not helping the sustainable messaging. That's taking the narrative in a different direction. So we've definitely seen a bit of a decrease in sustainability searches recently.
Interesting. As you say, given the cost of living crisis, general global inflation, maybe it's taken a bit of a pause. So we'll wait and see how those European regulations come into play, whether they bite in the years ahead.
Yeah, that's the thing. Whether consumers are searching for it or not, the regulations are going to be put in place. So it needs to be controlled, and brands are actively asking for features when it comes to our PLM solutions to store this type of data because they're preparing themselves for the changes in regulations.
Certainly, sustainability is going to be one of those trends, among others, technology, regulatory changes, all the elements that we've discussed. So, based upon sort of the trends that we see 5 years, how do you think that these changes are going to shape the luxury market?
So in terms of trends, I would, if I can give if I can mention three trends that I see coming up more and more every day in my day-to-day work is number one, digital transformation. So regardless of how advanced or how dynamic you plan to be, there is still an interest in becoming more digital. So what we discussed earlier in finding a provider that can offer you an integrated solution, if you can make sure that all of your data is seamlessly connected, then you can stay agile. And that's really what brands are looking for at the moment. So that would be from an organizational perspective. From a pricing perspective, dynamic pricing. I know I said luxury is not there yet, but if you were talking about 5 years, then AI and data analytics will play an increasingly important role in luxury pricing strategies. So it could enable brands to offer what we spoke about earlier, tailored priced based on customer purchase history, based on their browsing behavior on the website. If a customer is loyal, they might be offered a special discount or an exclusive peek into a new collection. So that's the ways to adapt the dynamic aspect to luxury without going into the discounting topics. And then in terms of the industry as a whole, I'm seeing a lot of luxury subscription services and variations to traditional ownership models. So as the concept of ownership evolves with the younger generation, I think luxury brands might explore these subscription-based pricing models. So offering exclusive access to product, services, or experiences on a subscription basis. I know that Gucci have started experimenting with digital subscriptions and offering kind of access to virtual fashion experiences. And this could also expand into physical goods where consumers subscribe to receive exclusive items on a monthly or seasonal basis. We're seeing that a lot in luxury renting. So the younger consumer is way more open to renting over owning luxury goods. And then that ties into the sustainability interest. And I've seen it a lot with platforms like Rent the Runway, By Rotation. So if these platforms are increasingly growing, then perhaps the brands themselves are going to start creating an equivalent to regain that power.
Fantastic. So we will look to see how the industry evolves over the next 5 years. Certainly a lot of unknowns out there, the progress of technological change. I think what you say about dynamic pricing being introduced in the business offers up some real interesting potential equilibrium where kind of pricing strategies go. And one last question then is price increases going to be slowing down here shortly, or are we already there?
Right before Christmas, my colleague Elizabeth and I had a webinar around pricing, but we spoke about the fact that the increases have been so steep in the last couple of years that we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing a reverse starting, and I think it will trickle down into 2025, where prices will be coming down, or at least they will not be going up, which is good news for us shoppers.
Are you able to tell our listeners where they could find that webinar?
If you get in contact with me on LinkedIn, I can
Okay.
share details of that webinar.
All right, fantastic. Well, I think that you are leaving us here with some good news after many years of, from a consumer perspective, bad news on the pricing side. This has been a super rich discussion. Your knowledge of this topic runs so deep across so many different areas. So I really appreciate you joining FSW Conversations today.
Thank you so much, Bryce. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for another great discussion as part of FSW Conversations. For deeper analysis and insights, please visit Fashion Strategy Weekly at fashionstrategyweekly.com, a media publication of strategy agency It's a Working Title. For questions, comments, and concerns, please reach out to our media team at info@itsworkingtitle.com. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcasting platforms.